3 weeks ago, two sisters sat down and answered a question this entire community has been asking since the day their mother passed away. Not in an interview, not through a spokesperson, in their own words on the network's own website. And buried inside that answer is a second question almost nobody has asked out loud yet.
A warm letter, and the question it didn't answer. 3 weeks ago, two sisters sat down and addressed a question this entire community has been asking since their mother's passing. Not through an interview, not through a spokesperson. In their own words, published on the network's own website. And tucked inside that message is a second question almost nobody has raised out loud yet. One that goes straight to the heart of who is actually running one of the largest Christian television networks in the world right now. For anyone following this story, the past few months have been difficult. Joni Lamb, co-founder and president of Daystar Television Network, passed away on May 7th of this year, following a private health battle that only became public in her final days. She and her late husband Marcus built something that, by the network's own figures, reaches more than 2 billion homes worldwide. Whatever else this video touches on, that reach genuinely mattered to real people. Viewers have written in for years describing programming that carried them through hospital stays, through grief, through nights when nothing else spoke to what they were feeling. That's real, and it stays real even alongside the harder questions worth asking. Who leads now? After Joni's death, the obvious question hanging over Daystar was simple. Who takes over? Her son Jonathan, who had worked at the network for years, was fired in November 2024, months before his mother passed, following a bitter, public family dispute involving his sisters Rachel and Rebecca. For weeks after their mother's death, neither sister said much publicly about what would come next. That changed on July 1st. It's worth walking through exactly what was said and, just as importantly, what wasn't. Rachel and Rebecca stepped into the space in Daystar's monthly newsletter that had belonged to their mother for years. A colon. Lum called Letters from Joni. Their message, titled simply, A Note from Rachel and Rebecca, thanked supporters for the outpouring of love since their mother's death. They wrote about missing her, about gratitude for the legacy of faith she left behind, and about the opportunity to continue the work together. They described feeling honored to carry the vision forward alongside the people who've supported the network for years. That's a genuinely warm letter. It reads like two grieving daughters trying to reassure a worried audience, and there's nothing in the tone that warrants suspicion. That's worth saying plainly, because balanced reporting matters most precisely when a story touches on grief. Losing a parent is difficult enough without having every public statement immediately picked apart online for what it left out. Credit where it's due. It's a sincere human letter. But here's what it didn't include, and that's where the real question begins. The letter never uses the word president. It never mentions chief executive. It doesn't lay out any governance structure, board vote, or clarify who legally holds final decision-making authority at Daystar going forward. It says the sisters are continuing the work together. But it doesn't explain what together actually means in terms of titles, authority, or reporting lines within an organization moving this much money and reach. For some, that's a meaningful omission, and it's fair to point out without assuming anyone is deliberately concealing anything.
Her son Jonathan, who had worked at the network for years, was fired back in November of 2024, well before his mother's passing, following a bitter and public family dispute. That left two other children, Rachel and Rebecca. For weeks after their mother died,
who actually holds the roles? Now consider who these two women are within the organization, because that context reshapes the picture. According to reporting from the Roy's report, Rachel Lamb Brown holds the title of Director of Communications at Daystar. Her sister Rebecca Lamb Weiss works as a producer and on-air contributor. Both are public-facing roles by nature. Auteur, communications and on-camera work are fundamentally about representing an organization, not running its internal operations. Here's the part almost nobody is discussing. Both Rachel and Rebecca are married to men who also hold senior positions at Daystar, and their roles are nearly the mirror opposite of their wives. Rachel's husband, Joshua Brown, holds the title of Director of Business Development. Rebecca's husband, Jonathan Weiss, who goes by JW, serves as Director of Information Technology, according to that same reporting. Worth pausing here for a correction. JW Weiss has no relation to Doug Weiss, the counselor who was Joni Lamb's second husband. They're two different men who happen to share a last name, and that confusion has spread widely enough to be worth addressing clearly, once again, on the record. So here's how it lines up. Rachel handles communications, the public voice of the network. Josh handles business development, the deals and operational growth happening behind the scenes. Rebecca is the on-camera presence people see on their screens. JW manages the technology infrastructure, keeping the network running day to day. Two sisters in the public-facing roles, two husbands in the operational roles that actually keep the business and infrastructure functioning. That raises a question worth asking carefully, because there's a completely ordinary version of this arrangement and a genuinely concerning one. And right now, there's only enough information to ask the question, not answer it. Is it possible that Rachel and Rebecca serve as the recognizable public face of Daystar's next chapter? The familiar Lamb family name reassuring a loyal donor base, while day-to-day operational control, the money, the technology, and the business decisions actually rest with their husbands. Two men who don't carry the Lamb name, and whom the audience knows comparatively little about. To be fair, plenty of family businesses operate exactly this way for entirely normal reasons. One spook. See, handling public relations while the other manages operations is common and isn't automatically suspicious. But when an organization has no legal obligation to disclose its governance structure, and its public statement introducing new leadership never mentions a title or chain of command, it becomes reasonable to ask who's actually making the decisions, and whether the audience even knows their names. The salary detail. There's a financial detail worth including, though the sourcing needs to be handled carefully since not all of it comes from the same level of reporting. The Roy's report, citing internal Daystar documents, reported that Rachel Lamb Brown's 2022 salary as Director of Communications was $190,000, with a planned raise to $200,000 for 2023. That figure comes from a credible, named outlet reviewing actual internal records, so it's reasonable to include here. Figures circulating elsewhere about Josh Brown's salary are less reliably sourced, coming from aggregator sites citing unnamed sources rather than reviewed documents, so no specific number for him will be repeated here. It's better to acknowledge uncertainty than state a figure with false confidence.
J.W. Weiss is not related to Doug Weiss, the counselor who was Joni Lamb's second husband. Different men, same last name, and that mix-up has circulated widely enough that it is worth correcting clearly on the record right here. So look at what that actually lines up to. Rachel does communications, the public voice of the network. Josh does business development, the deals and operational growth behind the scenes.
What a title does and doesn't tell you. It's worth slowing down on something important. Hearing titles like Director of Communications or Director of Business Development can make it tempting to assume those answer the question of who's actually in charge. They don't, and this distinction matters more than people realize. In most nonprofit and corporate structures, a director title describes an operational staff role. It tells you what department someone runs day to day. It doesn't tell you whether that person sits on the board, holds a registered corporate officer position with the state, or has legal signing authority over the organization's finances. Those are three separate things entirely. An organization can hand out impressive-sounding director titles to family members while actual governing authority, the ability to vote, sign, and legally bind the organization, sits somewhere else, possibly with people the public has never heard named at all. Based on everything reviewed for this account, including the July letter itself, nothing confirms that Rachel, Rebecca, Josh, or J.W. hold a board seat or registered officer position with the state of Texas. That doesn't mean they don't. It means the public record, as it currently stands, simply doesn't confirm it either way. For an organization of this size and reach, that's a gap worth naming rather than assuming away. Not a new arrangement. This family structure isn't hidden either, and that's worth stating clearly. The Roy's report has documented, going back to October 2024, that Rachel, Joshua, Rebecca, and JW have appeared together at high-profile events representing the network. That month, Rachel and Josh were photographed with former President Trump at a Faith Summit event in Florida, and a subsequent Daystar broadcast mentioned that JW had also attended. Whatever else one takes from that, it shows these four people were functioning as a unit publicly well before Joni's death made the succession question urgent. This isn't something quietly assembled in the past 3 months. It's a structure that's existed for years, which actually makes the absence of a clear organizational chart in the July letter more noteworthy, not less. If the arrangement has been in place this long, spelling it out now would have been straightforward. What Scripture says about stewardship. This is where Scripture speaks directly to the situation. 1 Timothy 3 outlines the character required of anyone entrusted with church leadership, stating that an overseer must manage his own household well, with his children respectfully, in order, because someone unable to manage his own house cannot be expected to care for God's church. That standard was never meant to apply only to whoever's name appears on the letterhead. It applies to whoever actually holds the authority, whether or not their name appears in the newsletter. Proverbs 27:23 adds a related thought: "Know well the condition of your flocks, and give attention to your herds." A good shepherd knows exactly who is tending what, and a donor base that has supported this ministry for decades deserves the same clarity about who is actually tending Daystar now. Why this gap matters more. Here, it's worth remembering why this particular gap carries more weight at Daystar than it would elsewhere. Daystar's parent ministry is classified as a church, meaning it isn't legally required to file the financial disclosure form most nonprofits submit annually. There's no yearly public document where a donor could simply check the current board roster or officer list, the way they could with nearly any other large nonprofit in the country. That's not a criticism of the July letter specifically. It's the broader reality the letter exists within. When the law doesn't require an organization to disclose its structure, a warm but vague public statement is often all donors receive, which makes the actual content and the omissions carry more weight than they would elsewhere. There's no definitive answer here tonight about what Daystar's internal structure actually looks like, and there's no pretending otherwise. What exists is a warm letter from two grieving daughters, and a set of documented job titles that raise a fair, specific question about where real decision-making authority actually sits. Sometimes the most honest thing a story can do is name the question clearly and leave it to those with actual authority to answer it. If Rachel, Rebecca, Josh, or JW ever choose to clarify exactly how leadership is structured at Daystar going forward, that clarity would be welcome, and it would answer a question a lot of loyal viewers are quietly asking right now. Thank you for watching The Celebrity Vault.